So again, here is the Area 5 Ag and Natural Resource Educators that is bringing this program to you. If you have questions, please reach out to the one that is listed in your county or to your nearest one, and we'll do our best to help you out. Today's session is the third and final part of the best practices for backyard chickens. I am Sadie Davis, and I am the Ag and Natural Resource Educator in Greene County, and I'm going to be talking about how to keep your birds safe. So housing and facility needs is what we're going to focus on right here in the beginning. Some general considerations that you're going to want to think about when you are starting your flock is what type of poultry are you going to want to raise? Are you going to have meat birds, egg-laying birds, or a combination of both? Are you going to include any waterfowl, so geese or ducks, into your flock? Is the birds you're going to pick tend to have the ability to be very noisy, flighty, or active, or are you going to look for more calm breeds? The amount of animals that you're going to be able to have is going to be determined a little bit by how much space you have available. And we're going to talk about zoning here in a little bit with Dana. She's going to be our second speaker. And then when it comes to housing, you're also going to want to think about if you're going to keep your birds indoors or outdoors or have a combination of both. So proper housing is important for several reasons. Poultry are prey animals that need to have shelter and protection from predators and the elements. There are many diseases that can spread from wild animals, especially we know in recent years we've had the avian flu that we've had to deal with. Salmonella is another big. Keeping your birds protected from wild birds and other animals is a huge thing. We need to consider having feed and water available for our flock, and then meeting those behavioral needs of our birds is of major importance. Basic needs, it does include the appropriate floor space, and I'm going to talk about that in some of the next slides. But proper ventilation is very important to prevent the buildup of bacteria and moisture. If you walk into your housing facility and you smell a pneumonia odor, you really need to check the ventilation and the litter moisture. High levels of pneumonia can lead to respiratory problems. Good litter, that could include wood shavings, which is always an excellent choice. Straw should be checked for mold or contamination prior to using that. Hay can sometimes be inappropriate because it does contain harmful spores and dust if you have poor quality hay, so that's not always your best option. Weekly cleaning of the house is not needed. Really, 1 to 2 times a year will be sufficient. The exception would be if the bedding material becomes entirely waterlogged. So if you had a leak or heavy rain that ran into your house. Next, nest boxes for laying birds located in the lowest, darkest part of the house because they like to lay in secluded areas. Provide 1 nest for every 4 to 5 females. That's a good rule to remember. Perches of an appropriate height are adequately spaced. Some birds, such as the domestic broad-breasted turkeys, struggle with perches and may injure themselves. For these types of birds, you may choose not to provide perches or provide perches that are very low to the ground. For all poultry, though, perches should be made available within the first few weeks of life, ideally no later than 4 weeks of age, so that they can still learn how to properly use those perches. Waterfowl, they do not necessarily need ponds to swim in, but they do need enough water for them to be able to preen and keep their feathers and nostrils clean. If they can dip their heads in the water, they can maintain their feather condition and health. Housing environments for poultry are just as numerous as the types of poultry that exist. There are many different types of options available for poultry housing. They range from hoop structures to pre-made sheds and coops to homemade sheds and coops. The amount of space that birds require depend on the type of poultry that you're going to want for your flock. In general, there should be enough space for the air to circulate freely, but not so much space that the housing environment gets too drafty in the winter. Some general space recommendations. In hot weather, more space is needed. Birds may also need more space as they grow. So not providing enough space leads to crowding, which can affect the health and well-being of your entire flock. Crowded birds are at greater risk of getting and spreading disease and developing behavioral problems such as feather pecking and cannibalism. For chickens, you're going to want to keep about 1.5 to 2 square foot of space per bird, with 6 to 10 inches of linear or straight perch space per bird. Perches should be about 12 inches off the ground, and there should be about 14 inches between the perches. For your egg-laying birds, you need about one nest for every 4 to 5 birds. For turkeys, you can start with 1 to 1.5 square feet per bird within the first 6 weeks of age, but space should then increase so that each bird has 3 to 4 square feet by 14 weeks of age. Ducks and geese, they're very similar to your turkeys. For the first 2 weeks of age, ducks and geese need to have a square foot of space, or a half square foot of space, but this should then be increased to about 4 square feet for each adult duck and 6 square feet per bird for each adult goose. For quail, you should provide about 1 square foot for every 10 chicks for the first 2 weeks of age. This should then be increased to at least 3/4 of a square foot per bird by 12 weeks of age for your meat birds. For quail that are kept as breeders, provide about 2 square feet per bird after 12 weeks of age. All birds need enough space for eating and drinking to prevent competition for feed and aggressive fighting. Meat-type birds should be provided at least 1.25 linear square inches of feeder space per bird. Your meat chickens need at least 1/2 inch of linear water trough space per bird, or 10 birds per nipple or cup drinker. For breeder chickens, at least 5 linear inches of feeder space should be provided, 2 linear inches of water trough space, or 10 birds per nipple or cup drinker. Smaller egg strains of chickens need about 2 to 2.5 linear inches of feed space and roughly 1/2 inch of trough drinker space to 9 to 12 birds per nipple or cup drinker for the adult birds. Medium weight egg laying strains of chickens need about 2 to 3 inches of linear feeder space per bird and roughly 3/4 of trough space for water, or 8 to 10 birds per nipple or cup drinker. If you're going to be raising turkeys, you're going to have about 1.5 linear inches of feeder space for your meat birds, 1 linear inch of water trough space, or 10 birds per nipple or cup drinker for those adult turkeys. Breeder turkeys need 3 to 4 inches of feeder space and 1 inch of drinker trough space per bird. And if you're into growing ducks, at 7 weeks of age, you're going to need about 3/4 of an inch of feeder space per bird. Breeding ducks need at least 4 to 8 inches of feeder space per duck, and then 1 inch per water trough space, or 12 birds per drinker cup, 18 birds per nipple drinker. And a big question that I get a lot of times is when people are starting their flocks, they want to ask what's the best type of fencing, and really you have a lot of different options available. The galvanized chicken wire, it has about 1 to 2 inch holes. It's cheap, it's readily available, but it does rust out easily, and it has little protection from the predators. Some people like to use the plastic poultry netting. It's the same size holes, 1 to 2 inch. It's cheap. People can really move it around easily, but again, there's little protection from the predators. Welded wire comes in a variety of hole sizes. It's very good at keeping out most of the predators, but it is slightly more expensive, so you're going to have to weigh the cost over the benefits for that one. And then chain link keeps out the larger predators, but you're going to have to be dealing with the smaller predators if you go with the chain link option. We're going to talk a little bit about hatching and aftercare. So how do you care for the young birds after they hatch? Really depends on whether you have a brooding hen that is raising the birds or whether you're raising them artificially. If you're brooding the birds artificially, you will need to prepare the area where you will keep the birds a few days before they hatch. Definitely clean and disinfect the area. Place fresh, clean bedding such as wood shavings or finely chopped straw on the floor. Set up food in the feeders and have the pans and waters already available. Set up the heat lamps depending on how many birds you'll raise. One heat lamp may be enough, but depending again on the number, you might need more than one heat lamp. The heat lamp should be hung about 1.5 to 2 feet above the ground and should be hung by a chain. Do not hang it by the electrical cord. Make sure the heat lamp is secure and is not going to fall because that could be a fire hazard. Young birds are not good at regulating their own body temperature and really need the supplemental heat for the first few weeks of their life. To tell if the birds are too hot or too cold, you really need to observe their behavior. The birds should be more or less evenly spread out within the brooding area. If they are too cold, they'll be clustered very close together, huddled near the heat lamp. If they are too hot, they will show the opposite behavior and be far away from each other, away from the heat lamp, and they may be panting or sitting with their wings spread out away from their bodies. Start with the temperature at 95 degrees Fahrenheit. You should measure this at the height of the chicks near the heat lamp. Then turn the temperature down by 5 degrees every week until the temperature is the same as the ambient temperature outside. Artificial brooding. There are many different types of batteries that can be used to brood and raise young poultry. Batteries are the cages. They're usually stacked on top of each other with pans under each cage to catch the droppings. Birds can also be brooded on the floor, so to speak, in a cardboard box for a number of small birds or in a brood ring. And you can see an example of the brood ring here on the PowerPoint. It's basically a barrier that is made around the heat lamp to keep the birds near the heat source, near the food and water. The ring can be made out of cardboard or any other flexible solid surface. And if you are looking to get your birds or you have them already, a good idea to have on hand is a poultry first aid kit. Here's some good suggestions to keep in that kit. You're going to want clean towels. So if you have an injured bird, you're able to wrap its wing or its leg to keep it from further injuring itself. You're going to want disposable gloves for you to wear when you're treating or handling those sick or injured birds. Antibacterial or antiseptic spray to clean and disinfect the wounds and treat the infections. Vet wrap bandage, that's to treat those injuries, to wrap them up, keep infection out. A syringe can be used for multiple reasons. It can give the medication, but it can also be used to water the bird if it's having difficulty or refusing to drink. A saline solution, you can use that to rinse the eyes or the wounds. Electrolytes, that's good to have for the birds that are in shock from a predator attack or if they're stressed from heat. Tweezers, handy tool to remove debris from the wounds. Scissors, you can cut the bandages, the gauze that you're going to be using. Nail clippers, even dog nail clippers will do for this, and a nail file. So if a bird injures its beak or its toenails, you can cut it off or file that sharp edge to keep it from getting caught and causing more injury and pain to the bird. And now we're going to look at some of those predator problems that we might have, along with some production issues we can face. Prevention is key when it comes to your predators. You're going to really want to use proper fencing around and above to keep the predators out. Fencing should also extend down into the ground so the predators can't really dig holes to get where you're keeping your birds. Some predators, they'll kill and carry off the adult chicks. That could include your coyotes, your dogs, foxes, birds of prey. Other predators, they will go after your chicks. Snakes, rats, raccoons, cats, they'll be the ones after the young birds. Some will kill the birds and leave the carcass. So your weasels, they're the ones that will just leave the carcass because they're really after the organs. Some will remove the bird's head but leave the rest of the body. Raccoons, your birds of prey, they'll do that. Many predators will eat eggs but not necessarily the birds. So your snakes, your raccoons, skunks, rats, possums, other birds such as blue jays and crows, they prefer to go after the eggs. And then predators will sometimes leave the bird severely injured but not kill them all the way. So that's when your first aid kit will come in handy. And then some production problems that you might be facing or will have to consider eventually when you are getting with your flock. Keeping the birds healthy, that could always be one of your main concerns, is keeping them healthy. And how do we do that? We get to know our birds. We spend time observing them so we know what their typical behavior is. And then you can identify the problems when they come up. You're going to want to inspect your birds every day and be proactive in treating them. Having a local veterinarian contact information on hand is always a good idea. So even if you just have questions, you can call them and ask. And stay on top of vaccinations and deworming and keep those records somewhere where you know they are. Maintaining the environment. Repair anything that breaks. So if you have holes in your fence, make sure to mend those so the predators can't get in. Have a proper biosecurity protocol, which includes dedicated footwear that you're going to wear around your birds, limiting the amount of visitors that you have around your flock. Washing your hands before and after handling your birds is always important. Make sure the birds have everything they need: adequate ventilation, lighting, space and resources such as the feed, the water, the nest boxes if you have egg-laying birds, and material for the dust bathe in and perches. So you're providing everything to provide them a healthy life. If you're dealing with aggressive males, that can sometimes be with your roosters or your turkeys. They become aggressive, they attack humans or your other birds. These animals need to be handled very carefully, so you're going to want to make sure you're protecting yourself by wearing boots, long sleeves. If you have to try and catch them, you can use a catch hook to capture them if necessary. There are some people that suggest catching them and holding that aggressive male while you go about doing your chores, so you can teach that bird that you're the one in charge. Using violence, if you get upset, frustrated, don't resort to hitting or kicking or, potentially hurting the birds. That's never acceptable. Sometimes a rooster or turkey will just always be aggressive no matter what you try. In these situations, it may be best to humanely euthanize the bird to prevent injury to yourself, to the others in the flock. You can also have brooding hens that become a problem. So some hens will go brooding. That means they sit on the eggs and then attempt to incubate the eggs, even if the eggs aren't fertile because the male is not present. Sometimes the hen will try to peck you if you try to remove those eggs. The hen will typically stay on the egg or eggs, only leaving the nest to eat and drink. You have several options. You can leave the hen and eggs for a few weeks until the broodiness stops, or you can remove the eggs every day so that she will eventually stop trying to brood with those eggs because there's no eggs for her to be able to brood. You can also face issues with trying to find avenues for selling your products. So if you plan on selling the meat or eggs from your birds, make sure to find out where and how you can sell these products, whether it's farmer's market or direct market from your home. You need to have some kind of long-term plan for that. And then I have a few additional resources that I wanted to share with you. If you haven't already, the Indiana State Poultry Association is a great resource here in our state. They provide a lot of free materials, and they are now running a valuation program where they can provide you with free resources if you want it. And then their website has a lot of the links to the other resources that are listed here, but we'll send this out later to you, so you have that. And that was my presentation. Next, we have Dana Gadikin from Vigo County. She's going to be talking about ordinances with your backyard poultry.
All right. So I wanted to start by kind of touching base with how I got involved with reevaluating the backyard poultry ordinance within Terre Haute. I started by attending the bees public hearing and then spoke to one of the commissioners. And then I was asked to join the poultry committee. And that's how I kind of got more involved in the government side of this. Before, I'd offered programming as far as how to take care of backyard poultry, but I hadn't interacted with the government aspect with as much. So that's how I got experience with how this entire process changed. And for this presentation, I touched base with one of the commissioners who was the chair for the poultry committee, and she kind of gave me a little bit more overarching patterns that she'd noticed, which is that there are like high, medium, and low things that you can control. There's a high big picture things like the environment, as in what is the history within the county or the city. And then there's also the environment of the bees ordinance and that kind of segueing into we can change livestock ordinances in Terre Haute. And then there's the medium level of influence, which is the governing body and what exactly are their priorities and their focuses or their goals within the county. And then there's like the bottom level of how much you can influence, which is your personal advocacy, how you can personally try to change it. So all these things have to come into line for that ordinance to change. Sometimes it just takes time in the right situation for it to really get the ball rolling. So that's what I wanted to start with, is how I got involved in some high, medium, and low things you can control. Sadie, next, please. Next.
I'm working on it.
Okay.
Okay, 1 second. I think I froze again. Oh, there we go.
Wonderful. So I wanted to start by, talk about ordinances, that they're a piece of legislation enacted by a municipal authority. So they're the rules for what can happen within an individual space. So we had a beekeeping ordinance and a backyard or a poultry ordinance, and those all fell under livestock within the city. So poultry ordinances or ordinance as a whole are not the same throughout the US. They depend on municipality and what specifically they're looking for. So the poultry ordinance in Seattle is 8 domestic fowl per lot, while in Cincinnati, it's 10 chickens. And in Indianapolis, there's you can have 12 chickens and 1 rooster with no lot of a minimum size. So each one of these cities interprets or is looking at poultry in a different way, and that's reflected in their ordinances. Next, please.
I have no idea why it's freezing on me. There you go.
Wonderful. So I'm going to set the scene per se. Before the end of 2019, when we were looking at our ordinances, there were no livestock allowed within city limits. So you weren't allowed to have poultry. And there had been many people who were very interested in changing the ordinance so that you could have poultry within the city of Terre Haute. So those are those advocates reaching out to their commissioners, trying to get the policies to change, but up to that point, nothing had changed. So as much as we weren't allowed to have poultry, I knew when I drove around Terre Haute that there were definitely existing flocks within city limits. So we were in this juxtaposition of you can't have livestock, but they're definitely here. And this was just like an existing condition or a conditioning state. As far as control, there was and is backyard big box stores and retailers that sell poultry. So poultry is being purchased. You're not allowed to have it, and we also know that it's here. So there's all these contrary ideas. The process for control of animals was a complaints-driven process. So if your neighbor complained that your chickens kept on getting out, that is when Terre Haute Animal Control would step in and remove animals. But if everything was hunky-dory and your neighbors never said anything, then you could have a backyard flock. So it was a complaints-driven process. Next, please. Towards fall of 2019, we had a beekeeping ordinance that was put in front of the commissioners. So there was lots of public interest. It was covered in the papers, front page. People were very, very interested in having bees within the city. So there was this nebulous area, and the commissioners wanted to clarify whether you could or couldn't ask the public to come and speak. And while they were speaking about beekeeping, they also spoke about chickens. So that kind of segued the conversation of, after we tackle beekeeping, what if we look at backyard poultry as well? So there were also at this time several new members to council and a new council chair. So there was a change in the tone and the goals of the commissioners for Terre Haute. So after the success with beekeeping and the commissioners making an ordinance saying you could have beekeeping within Terre Haute, that led the way. That kind of like, after this success, let's now tackle backyard poultry, which led us into how I became more involved in the backyard poultry situation. Next, please. So the committee established, the committee that was established asked several members of the community to come and be part of the committee. They worked with well-spoken advocates, and they also made it a working committee. So by that, I mean they pulled in members of the community to work with councilmen in order to come to an educated ordinance that wasn't too restrictive or too lenient. When before, a lot of the decisions were made just by the council in order to move things along. They really tried to engage the community, make them realistic, as well as providing good guidelines that would benefit the city. So the issues that were brought during that public hearing for backyard poultry were, how are we going to control these animals? And Terre Haute Animal Control was very concerned that there would be a whole bunch of birds, people would want to know what to do with them, and how do we do this correctly? The committee also found out that the general public wasn't terribly concerned. What they wanted was reassurance that this wouldn't become a nuisance, that birds would be taken care of well, they wouldn't be wandering the streets, that it would be a monitored activity. The committee also worked with the legal representation for the city in order to find relevant ordinances. So I worked with a couple of educators pulling in ordinances from different areas, as well as the legal representation took it upon themselves to do web searches in order to find relevant ordinances. And those all were compiled in order to make an ordinance that was relevant to Terre Haute. Next, please. So on December 19th, it was passed that the chicken ordinance would be 1 flock per residence within city limits. You could have no more than 8 hens and no roosters, and that you would register with Terre Haute Animal Control for a $25 annual fee. And this process would be monitored by animal control, but compliance or checking in on your animals if it was needed would be under Terre Haute Animal Control. So really paired, giving more guidance to having backyard poultry, as well as keeping it relevant to a city environment and keeping it safe for the public at large. Next, please. So after that entire process, after speaking with the commissioner, those pieces really resonated with me, of that there's big picture as far as like a history, and then there's a medium picture, such as what does the governing body that you're working with want to accomplish, and then it turns into how much can I actually control. All those things need to align in order for that ordinance to really change. So if you are interested in changing your ordinance, I think one of the first things to consider is, do you have more personal to your residences? Do you have a HOA or homeowners association? Do they have any restrictions on livestock? Then the following question is for your city, is there, what is the specific livestock code? And if you're looking for that, I would say definitely touch base with your A&R educator in your county to see where that information is housed. So for us, it was on the City of Terre Haute website, and that was a PDF that you could download and then just search within in order to find what the ordinance was and that guidance. So finding out where it stands now so that if you're interested in making changes, you have a good place to start. Next, please. And the step after that is planning for future change. What are your governing group's interests? What are they trying to accomplish? And also, what situations would build momentum so that you could get that ordinance changed or reevaluated? Sharing with your governing group how it'll impact the public, and also letting the general public know how it'll impact them. How the birds mostly take care of themselves. They're relatively quiet. You're very interested in their health. Those are all things that people want to know. So letting them know that this won't be a nuisance. They have nothing to be concerned about. And finally, how do you plan on monitoring livestock for biosecurity? Because that is a very relevant issue. Will you work with animal control in order to have a documented list? So in case there is a disease outbreak, there is that bank of all the birds or goats, what have you, within a given area. How do you plan on planning, or how do you plan on monitoring those livestock in case an incident like that occurred? So with that, that is, I think, the end of my presentation. Could you go to the next slide, Sadie? Yeah, that's me. If you have any questions, I think, for Sadie or I think we'd love to take them.
So we did have one question come into the chat box of how much of this spacing is necessary if birds are free range during the day and only in the coop in overnight.
So it's going to be a concern if they are egg-laying hens. So if you're going to be having spaces for them to lay eggs, you're definitely going to want that spacing. Make sure you have enough coops for them to be able, so that 4 to 5 chickens per coop. That's going to be important. You're going to want to make sure that for the feed and for the water, that spacing is very important too. So yes, they'll be free range during the day and they'll have plenty of room to move around, but when it comes to the water and the food, you're going to want that spacing as part of your build.
We also had another question. The participants were wanting to know if we could send out a copy of the slides when we send out the recording.
Yeah, that's fine. Not a problem there.
I agree.
Well, at this point, I think that's all the questions that I see. I don't know if any of the other participants have any questions. They want to type them into the chat box, or if any other panelists saw any questions that I missed. So we did get a question about, is the ordinance similar in Illinois or Chicago as to what we were talking about today?
I'm actually not sure. I would touch base with Extension to see where that information is housed, or maybe your local representative as to where all that ordinance information is. I'm not sure about the specific ordinances within Chicago.
And I would, support Dana's answer. It's very important that you contact someone locally to understand, because the rules and regulations vary from town to town, city to city, and across counties. So it's real important to find out locally what's going on, because what's going on in Indiana is not the same as Ohio, Illinois, Michigan, or Kentucky, or any other states. There may be some similarities, but there will be some differences. We've had another question come in as to, do you have any resources for organic chicken health?
I do not have anything like that, but that is something I can research and try and find. We can send that information out later when we send out the recording. Unless any of the other panelists know of resources for that.
I don't know of a specific resource. I just did a quick search and didn't find any extension resources right off the bat. But I think, especially for health related things, it's important to have a veterinarian that you're working with, and they will often know maybe some more natural or therapeutic remedies that you can try if you're wanting to go down that route. You might have to look for, some veterinarians are more specialized in that area than others. So you might just have to do a little search to find one that's in your area. But I think generally, if you have good management on pasture and stuff, they will not need a lot of medical attention if you maintain a good environment and the water and good feed and stuff. So you won't have to do as much medication if you do good management otherwise. So
Oh, here's a good one. Is there a specific place to find list of vets? So how could we find a veterinarian?
I don't know of a specific online resource. What I would do is Google, or even Facebook has been pretty good recently at having like a search feature for local things in your area. If you're not as internet savvy, there's always the phone books, and you can call your extension office and they can help. Usually they're connected to most of the veterinarians in the counties. So I think those are your main choices. If you have a neighbor that has livestock and stuff, it's could be that they know a veterinarian, so you could also ask them as well.
This is our last session of the poultry series. So if there is any lasting poultry questions that we've not answered that you have, feel free to type them in the chat box and we'll try to answer them. Just because we know that this was a very short, condensed series, that you may still have some questions that we didn't answer before. Well, at this point, I'm not seeing any questions coming into the chat box. But we do appreciate everyone for logging in. In about 2 weeks, we'll send you a survey that we ask that you please complete, whether you watch one session or 3 sessions, whether you watch them live or in recording, because the survey is going to provide us with some information about the quality of information we provided, how useful you found it, and also give us ideas for future programming that we might be able to do. We do appreciate you logging in and listening to us the last 3 weeks, and we hope that you are getting out there and enjoying what is at least nice weather at my house. It might be nice wherever you guys are. Hopefully it is and not storming, but we appreciate you joining us for today's program. And thank you to both of our speakers for today.